Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another interview session with Everything Horror Podcast. My name is Stacy Cox, and I am your host this evening. As you are aware, February is a special month as we are celebrating Women in Horror Month. We have a special guest joining us this evening. She is an award-winning writer and editor. She has written and published countless works, including Hunt and Vampire Theater, two novellas I've had the pleasure to read. Nancy Kilpatrick, it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacy. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Nancy, will you please tell us more about yourself? What city, state, or hometown are you from? What is your career, aside from writing, if you do have another career? And elaborate a bit more on your works.
Well, I'm originally from the U.S. I was born in Philadelphia, but I've lived in Canada more of my life than I lived in the U.S. And so I live in Montreal. I've lived in various cities here, but I've been in Montreal for the last, 20 years. Who knew? Montreal is, as you all probably know, is bilingual. So it's a really nice city to be in. It has a lot of European touches to it, and it's a very easygoing city. I like it a lot because it's slower paced, even though it's a very big city. It's got a lovely kind of casualness to it. So here you can still go to a cafe and sit there and have coffee for 3 hours, 1 cup of coffee, and no one's asking you to leave or giving you the stink eye or anything. So I like it here. And yeah, so I don't know what else you asked me. I got stuck on the first question. What was the second question? The second part of it? I can't remember now. Something about my...
Yeah, do you have another career aside from your writing?
That was it. Yeah, no, I don't. I do teach occasionally a short story writing class at a school, George Brown College, which is up here in Canada. And but of course it's international. Anybody can take the course because it's on the internet. So I do that. But aside from that, all I do is write. And yeah, right. Yeah. So my work basically is in the horror, dark fantasy realm. I've done different types of writing. So I have maybe about 10 mystery stories published. And I won an award for mystery stories. So I'm not just in the horror field, but there's that. I've written literary stories, one fantasy story, one, I guess you'd call it science fiction story. And then most of the rest has been dark fantasy or horror. It's kind of complicated, those terms now. So, who knows what anything means, because everything's trying to be, acceptable in this strange world we're in. So, yeah, so that's what I do. And I've edited a lot, too. I've edited 15 anthologies for very small presses and for major presses as well. So, yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much. And that is also very interesting. Actually, I aspire to get to that level where I could just focus on my works and, my writings and all my projects and everything more for like I'm doing it full time, but I aspire to get to that level to where it is my, my main career.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to get to that point. I'm not independently wealthy. That's obvious. But, you as a writer, you have a lot of things that in a way, you get a lot of benefits from writing, I believe, because you get to do what you want to do, which is really unusual in this world. But at the same time, there are some sacrifices to make, too, because, I often say if I had a full-time job at McDonald's, I'd probably be better off because, money is really, it is feast or famine. So sometimes you're just flying high and all things are good are happening and you're just selling like a maniac. And then the other times, nothing in sight. So it's just the way it is. It's funny business and you keep your head above water. But, I don't have children and I'm not with anybody at the moment, so I don't have a partner. And I think when you are in a different position where you do have a family to look after and you have mortgage payments to make, things like that, yeah, that's a difficult road in terms of being self-sustaining as a writer. So I think it really varies from person to person how it goes.
Definitely, I understand that. Yeah, and also I figured I'm gonna need this 9 to 5 to fund my projects as well. So
There you go.
no. So when did you first realize writing was your passion?
Oh, I don't really know when I first felt like the passion firing, but I always have written pretty well. When I was a kid, my grandfather, he doted on me, and we all lived in the same house, my grandparents and me, and so on. So he used to bring me home gifts all the time. He just adored me, and it's one of those sort of odd relationships because I'm not sure he adored anyone else, but he adored me. I was the special one, in his world, probably because I was a kid. And, adults have their issues and they don't get along, and they're different relationships than you have with a child. So he used to bring me gifts a lot, and often he would bring me a puppy. I had many puppies, which I named all of them Penny because that's what children do, right? So I had all these puppies, one after the other, after they lived their life or something happened or whatever. But one time he brought me a typewriter. Now, I don't know where he got these things or how he got them or whatever. He had he worked in a factory, and so he basically hung out, I guess, with the guys after work or on weekends and times, and somehow he would come upon these things all the time. So I got this typewriter, and I think I was about 7 years old at the time. I'm not sure. I know I wasn't quite 8. So I got this typewriter, and I started pecking, as you do on keys when you don't know how to type. You use one finger and you keep pushing keys. But I was 7 years old, so I knew how to read. And I knew, I started forming these little tiny child poems, on this typewriter. So that's sort of my first connection with actually writing something. And I can also tell you my first real connection with, I suppose you'd call it the love of books, was when I was, again, around the same age, I think it was. It's hard to quite remember exactly what age, but it was probably around 7. And I was in school in Philadelphia, and our school took a trip to the big library downtown. And it was a gorgeous, gorgeous old building, not a Victorian, but a, sort of revival type building. But it was huge, and it still is huge. So it wasn't just a childhood huge. I've been there since, and it's really a big, beautiful place, marble and lovely woods and so on. So back in the day, when I was 7, we didn't have computers. We had the Dewey Decimal System was riding high on these little cards that they stuck in slots, and so you'd have to pull out this drawer, and it had all these cards. So if you wanted to find a particular book, you could look it up by the author or by the title of the book. So we were learning about the decimal system and that whole thing that ran the library at the time, and wandering around. And then they sort of guided us towards the children's section. And I was perusing the shelves in my childhood, and I saw this book, and I pulled it out, and it's called The Little Witch. And that was my first book that I selected on my own, which had a lot of impact on me because it was a story that is kind of a little bit close to home. And I didn't know it at the time, but it turns out years later when I thought about that book, and I thought, I wonder, I don't remember much about anything about the book except the story, the sort of basic storyline. So I looked it up on the internet and discovered that this book had been in print for 40 years. Many, it was really, really popular. And there's entire websites of people, exclaiming how this book meant so much to them, and the accolades for the author, who apparently was a librarian somewhere in New England. And she had written this one book, and I think she'd also written a bit of poetry, and that's it. But this book stayed in print forever. And then there was some kind of anniversary just a few years ago of, I don't know, however long that anniversary was. I guess it was the 40 years or something, or 50 years by then. So yeah, so that was my first real book that I selected, that wasn't selected for me or read to me as in my youth, or forced to me by the school, forced on me, the way they pick out books for you that they think you'll like. This is the one I selected. And so of course it had a lot of meaning to me.
Wow, that's awesome. And actually, I've always wanted a typewriter. And then I like that thought occurred in my head, and it's like, what if I make so many mistakes on a typewriter because I've never used one? And then I have found this app on, on the Apple Store, the iTunes Store, and I think it was called the Tom Hanks typewriter or something like that. So yeah, I got that app and I tried to type, and I'm actually typing like I'm typing on a typewriter. I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? This is a phone. But it was so hard. I found it so hard to type on that little screen that I didn't really stick with
It
the
is
app.
hard.
Yeah, and I'm
I
like,
usually do things by voice.
oh,
Instead of typing on the phone, I usually do voice. I mean, you don't make mistakes. The phone makes mistakes, right? You say a word, it types a different word or a different spelling than you're anticipating, but you can correct it. But it's a whole lot easier than trying to type on those tiny keys.
oh yeah, definitely. And I even tried the voice typing myself, but I found that trying the voice, it messes up more often than not. So it's like, I guess I'm better just using my hands. What is one of the most memorable experiences you've had while on your writing journey?
You mean in actual writing or in life in general? What? When my writing journey is sort of connected to my life journey, my life and my writing, and I guess everything is like a whole to me. It's a one thing. It's not so segmented. If I didn't do certain things like travel, for example, I love to travel, and that feeds my writing. People feed my writing, and I feel like when I'm able to create, I'm feeding other people, not just with my writing, but also the way it nurtures me to be able to write. And so I'm able to then, give that to my friends and the people that I love. So yeah, what did you mean? I'm a terrible interviewee.
Oh no, you're fine. That's exactly what I mean. And actually, while we're on that note, is that, in your opinion, like what makes a good story? Is it like the connection with your audience, or what makes a good story?
I never think of my audience at all. I mean, I don't write for anyone. I don't write with the idea, oh, this is a great idea for a bestseller. I think I'll write this and make money. I know people that do this actually, but I don't do it. I can't do it. It doesn't work for me. I'm not that kind of person. So basically, I'm writing for myself. I write what is interesting to me, and I write from my feelings. I'm very much of a feeling writer more than an intellectual writer. So I'm writing the feelings that drive a story. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't have an idea for a story or I don't have some characters in mind. That happens occasionally. Yeah, and occasionally there's something that comes out of a dream or something I see on the street, a place I visited, anything like that could trigger it. But basically, to write the story, I have to just go with the particular flow that comes from me, and I put that on the computer, and then that's the process of the creativity. That's the part where it comes out of you or of me in a creative way, and then of course I have to work on it. I have to do the editorial work to sort of take what is there and make it understandable in the language that we all share. And I don't just mean in English, because things can be translated, but in the way that we all understand the world, so that I don't have these obscure things that only I understand, and say, ha ha, and the reader, ha ha, you don't know, but I do. That's stupid. So basically, I'm trying to write something that is personal, and it's from me, from some part of me. And then I have to craft it into a piece that works for other people as well.
I understand that completely, and I actually feel the same way in my writing. I write for myself first and foremost, what my interests are, where my passion lies, and actually, it kind of irritates me when I look at different conversations on social media about how you need to write what sells, and in my mind, I'm going, okay, what sells, and then when and then when I'm seeing these like absurd suggestions, such as like, history books and everything. Okay, that's all fine and well for you, but that's not what I write. I'm more the horror fantasy realm. I'm the crime thriller and all of that. That's what I write. And I feel like that's why I come in. It's like, write for you first. Write what makes you happy, and then you share it with the world. They'll like it or they won't like it.
Yeah, I mean, that works for me too, because I mean, I don't see wasting my life marketing. It's not that I'm not trying to sell work. Of course I am. Of course, everybody that writes wants to sell their work so other people are reading it, because writing is communication. But the idea of you can write. I wish somebody would say what would sell. Nobody seems to know. People just think they know. And of course, if they're basing it on what they're seeing now in writing, that's already passé. That most, if it's not a self-published book, if it's done by a major house, which are the people that are buying, work from you and paying you for it, what they're putting out today was bought 2 years ago. So it's already over. It's not what they're buying today for 2 years from now. And even in self-publishing, I mean, it takes time to write a novel. Yes, there are these maniacs that you read about that can knock out 100,000 pages in a week. Well, good luck to them. But that's not the average writer, and it's certainly not me. I can't do that, and it's not what I want to do. I want to enjoy the process. To me, life is important. It really is, and I want to enjoy the moments that I have in life. That not pushing for this gold ring all the time, which isn't to say that you don't want acknowledgement, you don't want people to like your work, but it can't be the only goal, because I don't think it's in the end that fulfilling. It's the key to the executive washroom. You fight and you fight and you fight and you get that key. And then what? Then there's another goal above that and another. For what? To what end? If life is not making you, giving you the opportunity to make yourself feel good about what you're doing, I don't understand how you can really write something. This is me speaking about me, how I couldn't write something just to have it sell, period. Which isn't to say that I haven't in the past done some work for hire. I've worked in a couple of arenas where it's a preset world. And because it's a preset world, it's not my creation. But within that world, there is a creation. People who, for example, I did 2 books in the Jason world, Jason the serial killer. And those 2 books were part of a 5-book series that was done by Black Flame Publishing in connection with New Line Cinema, which owns the rights. And so they wanted to do some novels based on Jason when Jason went into space in the movie called Jason X. And so they did 5 novels. So I did 2 of those 5. And that's, that world has a lot of limitations, because Jason is a pre-established character. But within that pre-established character, you can invent an entire world around that character and who he is and how he is and even why he is, if you go that route. So so that there's that. But I mean, that's not full-blown creativity where no one is directing you. No one is saying, do this, do that, or it has to be this way or that way, and can you do this within this world? This is your own creation, your own world. How you envision this world is coming from you. And that's a whole different way of being. And it's freeing. It's terrifying, and it's also freeing. It's terrifying because if you've invented it, you want other people to read it, you have to make it work for other people too. It's not like just taking a dream that's really chaotic and you wake up and you have such a wondrous feeling about that dream and just spilling out that dream the way it happened, because a lot of times the way a dream happens isn't really understandable to anyone else unless they're into dream analysis, but that's not most people. So you have to be able to hammer it into a shape that is recognizable to your reader. So that to me is what it's about, is to find that lovely creative spark and to run with it, just run with it, because it's so beautiful and it's so wonderful. It fills you up. It fills me up to do that. It fills my soul. And by doing that, I come up with something. And then when I've come up with that something, then I have something to work with. So that's what it is for me. So I don't know about this whole idea of, write something that sells or write a bestseller. Good luck to those people. I don't know how it's done. Wouldn't know what to even write if somebody said, write something that sells. Who knows what sells? This is the sort of mystery of publishing anyway. No one's ever known.
Exactly. And I understand that. And actually I feel like in the writing business and cinema entertainment alone, especially also when it comes to, filmmakers, where people say everything up under the sun has already been done. It's like, okay, but remember, we're like decades in this, and sometimes I feel like a lot of people won't really look your way if you're not with some big publishing agency. Like you have to be associated with a big name for people to look at you. But me, like I am a self-published indie author. Well, that's actually the same thing. I am an indie author. Yeah, I am an indie author. And I choose to take that route because, as I've mentioned previously, I don't really want to sell my idea to some big publishing firm. And, on top of them charging me thousands of dollars to get published through them, they still want to make profits off your success. For every book you sell, you get this, type of thing. And then just say, for instance, if your book goes even further than that, which is what I'm trying to do with one of my projects, I'm trying to turn it into a whole franchise, a brand, and you mean to tell me I'm bound to this company, for that, every product or whatever I sell, every movie I sell, they got to make profit off of that on top of, paying thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this going. I don't like the idea of that.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure who's asking for this money to publish a book. So there's certainly a difference between publishing companies that, for example, Pocket Books and St. Martin's Press and the big places that are in New York usually. I mean, you're not having to pay them to publish; they pay you. That's the point. But these companies they've cropped up a lot since self-publishing. There's a ton of these companies, and they are all charging people to, quote, help them write and to get them published. And so they may actually, move to the point of publishing a book for you, and then theoretically doing some marketing. I don't know how much marketing they do. I have no idea. I mean, I would never pay somebody to publish my book. I mean, I don't even understand the concept. So I think, if that's what you're faced with, you should probably, yes, be on your own and do it your way. And also try to get into some of the, if you write short fiction, if you do that, that's a good way to try to get yourself into some of the anthologies. There's tons of them that you run across just on Facebook alone. There's always people doing anthologies, and you see them listed in different groups and here and there and everywhere. And some of them pay, and some of them pay, a decent amount, and some of them pay a little bit because that's what they can afford. But, they're buying your work for that particular anthology. They're not buying it forever. They buy it for that anthology. You still have the work. You can publish it yourself down the road, or you could sell it to somebody else for a second time around or whatever. But I mean, that's kind of the way to go to get your stuff out there. And I think there's an awful, I've only had contact with one of these companies. A friend suggested I go to their, whatever you call it, like a webinar or something. And it's like all the webinars that you see on the internet where, somebody says, I've got the cure for diabetes. I know how to make ingrown toenails stop, whatever the hell it is. And they kind of go on and on and on. They have the answer and they're going to give it to you, and you have to listen to them for about an hour before you get the answer. That is usually something obvious. So I saw one of these companies and I listened to the long spiel, and it was somebody who'd sold hundreds of thousands of books and this is how they did it and blah, blah, blah. And I was kind of curious about this and got to the end. And then it was a pitch to sell the services, of course. And so they wanted to do one of the things they were going to do is help you write your description on Amazon if you do self-published book. Right? So they will help you with the description. So at that time, I wanted to, just check it out. And so I said to the guy, well, look, I'm a writer. I've been around the block quite a long time. And I have a description up there. And this is from a publisher who publishes my, Crossroad Press does my new current series, my vampire series called Thrones of Blood. So I had the first book up at the time, or the publisher put it up, and they had the ebook and the print book and the hardcover book and all that up there. And I had a description that I wrote because they always ask the author to write the description since we know our work best. So I put this description up with it. And so I said to Guy, I've got this and and I said, well, I'm not really willing to pay this money to have somebody read something that I've written, which is probably okay. So he said, you know what I'm going to do for you? This is the sort of pitch, right? I'm going to read it for you for free. So he's going to read it for me, and he's going to give me some pointers. And so I said, oh, well, that's really nice of you. I wasn't verbalizing everything that was in my mind, you understand. I was just listening a lot to this. And so he's going to read it for free, and he'll get back to me. But he's really busy, really super busy. He had all this stuff to do, and he'd get back to me next Monday. And then Monday came and went, and the assistant gets in touch with me. He says, oh, so-and-so is really busy. It's like nobody else is busy in the world, right? Just him. So anyway, he'll get in touch, Anyway, so he finally went to the listing on Amazon and he read the blurb, which I had written, or the description, I should say, that I had written. And so he got back to me and he said he thought it was really good. And he said the only suggestion he could make is to put things in point form, with little bullets, boom, 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 which is the style nowadays. I get it. I don't care about style, but, you see that a lot, especially on self-published books, people going bullet crazy. So, so that's, and I would have paid for that if I had been interested in paying for that, which I wasn't. But I think it was something like, to buy that particular service was about somewhere just under $100. But that was a very simple service because there were other things that were attached to it so that you could go on and you'd end up spending thousands. I could see that right away. But I think there's a lot of that. And I'm not saying it's all scam because I met a man at you don't mind if I continue on, do you, for a minute here? I know you probably have other questions. Can I just continue for a minute?
Oh, no, you're fine.
Well, I met this guy at a World Fantasy Convention, and we ended up sitting at a table together, and, how are you, who are you, and all this stuff. And so he said he was a writer, and I said, what do you write? And he writes fantasy. And I said, oh. And so he pulled out some, promo material and handed it to me, and he had about 10 books. And I said, oh, who's your publisher? And he says he's self-published. And I said, oh, you self-published all of these books yourself? How is it? How are you doing with it? So he had like 10 books done. And he ended up telling me that he spent, at that point, that was a World Fantasy that was probably 10 years ago, he spent $10,000 per book to get these books in print. And so the company that he was with, whatever it was, they read the manuscript. They presumably at least proofread it, if not edited. Who knows what they did. They had the cover. They had everything. They put it together. They put it up so he wouldn't have to self-publish it. And so he spent it for 10 books, $100,000. So I'm like, wow, okay, that's a lot of money. And, I kind of asked delicately how they're doing. And I think he said, people always say, oh, they're doing really well, and I don't know what really well means. But and then he sort of made a comment that it was something like, well, it's getting better kind of thing as it goes, getting better, like in a way that's told me that sales probably hadn't been so good because, of course, he was totally unknown. And now he's got 10 books and maybe he's got a bit of a following and he's done some ads. Who knows? But it's there's a world like that out there now. It's like as soon as self-publishing happened, thanks to Amazon, which is a blessing and a curse, as soon as that happened, all of these people come out of the woodwork with these companies and I have, gotten ads from many of them, and they want to do this and they want to do that. And I know a number of people that have just blown a lot of money on these things that don't really take them anywhere. And I'm sure the company would say, well, you didn't do it right. You didn't do it properly the way we told you to do it or whatever. But I don't really think that you can just force sales. You can do your best to make your sales happen, but you can't force anything. There's no forcing in this business. There's just a lot of hard sweat and work, and there's also a lot of luck involved, being in the right place at the right time with the right thing. And that is not something that anybody can predict. So that's my take on it. So I would encourage you to write some short stories and take them to some of the presses that you run into. I get messages all the time about them. So, they're out there on the internet, and try to get yourself published in this way too, not just doing it yourself, because then it builds you up as sort of a known entity in different ways. There are people that actually still buy books. So they buy anthologies, and they would buy these, and they would see your name and your story, and you'd start to get a reputation.
Yes, and I must have been looking in the wrong places, because whenever I Googled publishing companies, it came up with these companies that have packages going anywhere from $500 upwards, thousands of dollars, and I'm like, wow, that's expensive. And then, just looking around at different conversations on social media, there's this whole thing where, say if you actually did sign to a publishing company and you think that'd be the end of it, I'm done with it now. Overnight, I'm going to be this, well-known best-selling author, which doesn't happen. And I've actually found out that even publishing, even though they're supposed to market your book, they don't. You still have to do all that heavy lifting yourself. So I'm thinking to myself, so this is what I paid thousands of dollars for me to still do the work.
Yeah. That's
wow.
Right.
Well, I know you mentioned before that the little witch, enticed you and everything, but I noticed there's a lot of, you travel the vampire theme a lot. And I just want to know, what has you so captivated in the vampire realm?
Well, I think it goes back again to childhood, because back in the day, I guess there still is, the Saturday Night Horror movie on somewhere in the world. And back then it was a big deal, and I was too young at points to be able to watch it. But occasionally I could watch it. Just something happened where somebody let me watch it. My favorites were the vampires. And I always liked the vampire better than the werewolf and, the mummy and all of that. The vampire was really special because the vampire looked like us, acted like us, talked like us, could move around in society. And I thought that was such a cool idea, this creature that can trick us, basically. And also, I liked a lot of the things about the vampire having these powers that have been bequeathed upon him or her, and they usually are things like extra strength. Of course, they live a long time. They might live eternally. They can hypnotize people. There's limitations, of course. There's the garlic and the crosses and the mirrors and all that, but current writers, they usually adapt those things and try to bring the vampire more into the present so that they don't have those limitations, or so many. So I like this idea of it. And then the old movies that happened, you'd get these wonderful battles between, usually, say in the Christopher Lee version, you get this battle between Christopher Lee as Dracula and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing in the end. So it was like this real battle. It was really fun. And also, the idea that the vampire is so wily and strong and is it kind of invincible. There's a new series out on the BBC. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's called Dracula, and it's the vampire in that series is kind of based on the book, or it's based on the scenes that are not shown in the book, like the part where Jonathan Harker does escape Dracula's castle, and then he's been in a convalescing somewhere in a religious order, but that's not written about in the book. That's what they took that scene and started to expand it. And also when Dracula comes to England, he's coming on this ship, and you don't see anything really that's happening on the ship. All you know is the ship has arrived in the harbor and everyone's dead, including the captain. And there's a bunch of boxes of dirt, and that's all you know. So you don't know what happened on the ship. So they took that and they made that into one of the 3 parts of the series. So it's kind of like that. And that Dracula in that series is quite good in the sense that he really has lived lifetimes, and he really seems to be invincible. It doesn't seem to be anything that's going to bring him down, which is what I love about writing the vampire, because I'm always trying to write that type of vampire. I don't want to use the word despise. That's too heavy duty, but I've got a collection of vampire books I've collected for many decades. I've got about at least 2,500 books, and I stopped collecting about 10 years ago. So it tells you what was written before. And, I've read, there's like a handful of wondrous books, the top, 10%, let's say. And then there's the bottom 10%, which is the really vile things that if I wasn't a collector, I would throw it across the room. But, I don't. And then everything else is in the middle, it's kind of mediocre. But what I like are the books that make the vampire difficult for human beings. Not just difficult in the sense of avoiding, but trying to fight this creature and not being able to, because he or she has so many abilities and power, the power of many lifetimes, the knowledge and awareness of lifetimes, the having seen it all, having seen everybody, every type of person, how people are. It's almost like a psychological understanding of the human race these creatures have. And so they get to some point where it's pretty hard to get them down. You can't fight them easily. And that's one of the things I liked about that series. And I like about a lot of vampires, where it's hard to battle them. It's hard to win. They are the supreme predator. We are the prey. And so essentially we're having to fight to survive, but they also are trying to fight to survive. So yeah. So that all intrigues me about the vampire. I don't know what my psychological bent, is. I suppose I could, manufacture something or go back into my childhood, which I have done, of course. But the vampire just strikes me of all the monsters as being the one that is so, it can just, bedazzle us easily and can really trick us because, if you've got like a mummy or you've got a werewolf in front of you, there's nothing to think about. It's just automatically the enemy, some kind of creature that comes from under a bridge, whatever. But when you've got a vampire, they look like us. You could meet them in the supermarket. You could be sitting at a restaurant with a vampire at the next table. You could be walking down the street. They could be anywhere. They could be anything, especially today because we've modernized them so that they do fit more into society now, and they're not really allergic to garlic so much, or they can avoid it easily, and they don't, the mirror thing is not an issue anymore. Writers have had to deal with that. Even, in sunlight, of course, in Dracula the book, the vampire does walk in sunlight a little bit. He's out in England and in London in the daylight, at least, if not sunlight. So that's got, a precedent there. And so now the vampire can be anywhere, anytime, and mirrors aren't a problem. Although a friend of mine, Elaine Pascal, she wondered if they could take selfies. Maybe they can, who knows? But do they have a reflection? It depends what the writer wants to make of the vampire. You create your own version, and then you stick to that version, and you make it plausible for the reader. So I think, that it's a really malleable creature, and it's also it's got so many directions it can go in. You can do anything with the vampire, as we've all seen. We've seen all kinds of things come and go, including Twilight. So there's many extremes with a vampire that can be delved into, and it's a lot of fun to work with.
You must have read my mind there, because I was actually going to ask you, what are your feelings on the evolution of vampires throughout the years, and I was going to mention Twilight because, as you're aware, not too many people are satisfied with Twilight. You know, just because of the path that it goes down, and you know, with the sparkling vampire and sunlight versus them burning into flames like we're used to. So I would say you must have read my mind there.
Well, I don't see Twilight as a bad thing. I mean, to me, because I've read so bloody much in this subgenre, if you will, I just see it as an arm, a branch of the vampire. The vampire has many branches, and there are all kinds of vampires out there. It's not just blood drinkers, and it's not just what we envision, someone in a cape. You know, it's not like that. There's a whole range of types of vampires. So I see Twilight as just a branch of, you know, this big tree, and it's one part of it. That's all. You know, I think people get a little upset because it becomes so big, like things that are really become popular in this status quo and general population. They take on they take a lot of space. You know, there are a lot of books, there were a lot of movies, there's a lot of merchandise, all this stuff, you know, and then the news around it comes in, you know, all the entertainment news. So it takes up a lot of space. And I think people, you know, partly react to that. And if it's not perfect within their vision of the vampire, but they also, you know, if it goes too far away from what they envision a vampire is like, they get upset. It doesn't bother me because I've seen too much. Let's put it that way. But yeah, it just was what it was. And I saw all of the films, and I've read some of the books, and yeah, I didn't buy any of the merchandise, but yeah, I went with my one of my ex-boyfriends to see one of the movies. He was visiting me in Montreal, and we were looking for a film, and he said, well, why don't we go to this Twilight thing? I've never seen any of these. And I think it was the fourth movie or the third. I can't remember where this happened. So we went, and I figured he wasn't going to love it, but, you know, we went anyway. And so he sat there. He was very quiet during the movie, you know, very quiet. And when it was over and the credits were rolling, I turned to him and I said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, it's all about shoes and dresses. Because this was the wedding one where she's getting dressed for it took a long time. She's, you know, picking out things to dress for her wedding, right? And he was startled by this. He didn't quite get it. But yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, that is actually a great perspective to have. And actually, it put things into perspective when, you know, you as a writer yourself, you're creating your own works, or even if you're into cinema or what have you, just the creative arts, and how you put your own spin onto things. And like one thing I like to experiment with a lot is I like to with crossbreeds. So like the human crossbreeding over with some creature, whether it be part werewolf, part vampire, just part any kind of monster. I just like to experiment with those crossbreeds a lot. So that actually does put things into perspective as far as using your own creativity to merge the story that's actually kind of merging from this well-traveled road.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the crossbreeding is great. I do that in my series too, because yeah, it's an interesting thing to what and it's not a new thing, of course. You know, there's been books written in the past about this. One of my favorites was called Twig. Twig off the old branch. Anyway, yeah, but there's a lot of crossbreeding in this, with any kind of creature. I think it sort of parallels society in a way that we're just showing that, in a way, we're all just human beings here, and it's not this kind of segmented world, or there's segregation that was there of people. There's no, well, of course we're in a state now where we've got a coronavirus, so everybody's panicking, but ultimately, you know, it really is human beings, and they have always lived together, they've always intermingled, and they've always copulated, and then this is how we all can trace our roots back to the Neanderthals, because we all come from the same place. So I think this is more aware, there's more awareness of this in the last maybe 20 years, which is why the idea of connecting two things that probably normally wouldn't go together in most people's minds is fine now. So because what do you get when you've got this combination of opposites is what it is. And so in this case, we're talking monster and human. You get this combination. What do you get out of this? Is it going to be a monster? Is it going to be a human? Or is it going to be something unto itself? It's probably something unto itself because, like everything else, this is evolution.
I definitely agree with you there. Well, Nancy, you have been a busy woman with your works. In addition to, we mentioned before your many books and hundreds of short stories out there. You also have some new releases out as well as some upcoming works. Can you please elaborate on all these projects?
Well, I'll start with the two self-published I did. They're the only two, and they're basically novellas. They're long short stories. And I wanted to check out self-publishing. That's why I did it. I was curious how it would work. So I did the ebooks for two books. One is called Wild Hunt, and the other one is Vampire Theater. So they're obviously of a set about vampires. And then a small publisher that I know that I published one book with in the past has published the print books, and that's Baskerville Books. And they did the print books of those too. So that was kind of fun. And I like doing those stories because they were previously published, but not recently. And I wanted to pull them out of, and dust them off and put them out again because both of them got very good reviews in the past, and people really liked them. And I thought, well, these are standalones, and they're part of like a modern vampire presentation. So I put those out for that reason. So people that read them like them. It's different doing it on your own, as you know, because when you have a publisher, it helps. You don't have to do all the tech stuff and all that, which I absolutely hate, which is probably why I'll never do another self-published book, because I don't want to do that stuff. It's too much energy and time. So there's that. And then I've got the vampire series, Thrones of Blood, which is going to be a 6-book series right now. Book 5 is out, just coming out as a print book. It was out as an ebook just for the last 2 months or something. So basically those 5 are out, and then the last book in the series will be out. It was supposed to be 2020, but it's looking more like 2021 now because of other things. So, and that series, by the way, was just optioned for film and television. So we'll see what happens with that. And let's see what else. Oh, yeah, I'm working on a novel that's just about finished. It's a cross between science fiction and horror. So it's a little bit like, it's not the story of Alien, the movie. It's not anything like Alien. But, Alien can be seen as science fiction or it can be seen as horror, depending on who's viewing it. So it's that type of blend of two types of fiction. So that book is almost done. So there's that. What else is there? I've got a few other things. I'm so busy. I know everybody's busy. I'm just really crazily busy because I'm going to Stoker Con in April, which is in the UK. So I've decided to do an extended trip since I'm going all the way over there, and that's going to be a chunk of time out of my life. So I've got to do a whole pile of things before I actually go there. And a lot of it has to do with writing, like the book that I need to finish. And I have to start the final book in the series and so on. So yeah, that's what I'm doing these days.
Wow, that's also exciting. And also you recently published a new story called Woodworker, and I haven't read all of your work yet. I'm working my way around there, but of course it's a little different than the ones I was currently reading. So tell us about Woodworker.
Well, Woodworker was actually published years ago in a story or in an anthology called Desire Burn that was edited by Janet Berliner, who she's gone now, but she did this anthology, and it's a story that's kind of a weird story because it's about a woman who has learned how to work with wood from her grandmother, who learned from her grandmother. So it's a generational thing that's been handed down. through this family. And so she happens to now be in the Far East, living there temporarily with her husband, who is someone who investigates how certain specific insects live and what they do, and as a kind of a scientist in that realm. And so she's there in this place. It's very, very hot. The temperature is really overwhelming, to the point where people don't go out in the day. They basically try to sleep in the day, and the night is the cool time, so they're up at night. So he goes out to look at the insects and study them, while she goes into the basement and she's making something out of wood, which is what you don't know until you read the story. So that is a kind of a quirky story. Yeah.
Thank you. I enjoyed that story as well. And I was just actually kind of curious. Now, being it is Women in Horror Month, let me ask, what does Women in Horror Month mean to you?
It means that this is a lopsided world, and we shouldn't have to have a horror month. Just like February is also Valentine's Day, and February is also Black History Month. So all those things, we can keep Valentine's Day, but the rest of it we shouldn't have to have. But we do have to have, because it's a strange world we live in. So when it comes to women in horror specifically, there are a lot of women that write horror, but there's not many women who can break that glass ceiling. And if you ask anybody on the street, well, or not anybody, but anybody who reads in the horror realm, who reads, no, I'm not talking about writers, I'm talking about ordinary people who buy and read books, those people. If you ask them to name 2 or 3 men who write horror, they'd start with Stephen King, of course. And then there's other people. They might mention Clive Barker, they might mention Neil Gaiman, they might mention Robert McCammon. There's a bunch of them. They're all sort of really bestseller, top-notch writers. But then if you said, well, what about women? Can you name a couple of women that write horror? They'd probably be hard-pressed. And after a lot of thought, they might say, well, what about Anne Rice, that woman who writes the vampires? They'd say that. That's what they'd say. But it's not on the tip of anybody's tongue, women who write horror, except, for other writers. We all know each other, but that's another story. It's unfortunate that women have such a difficult time. Once in a while, I have not heard this myself, but I've heard women say that there are men in the horror field who say that women can't write horror. I don't even know what that means. But, that's not been my experience. I haven't heard that. I've worked with a lot of male editors, so I haven't had that experience where somebody said, well, you can't write horror. There's all kinds of horror anyway. There's all ranges of it. It can be quite visceral. It can be very psychological. It can be soft horror. There's all a big range of what the word horror means. So, but it's somehow women just never quite get to the known level that men have gotten to. And I've noticed a lot on Facebook, for example, because I know so many people that are writers, and we're all friends. And, I read the news feed a little bit every day. I try to read a little bit of it. And there's always people that are getting these large publishers and multiple book deals, and or have their books being made into film. There's a number of them, and they're usually men. And it's not to say that there aren't some women who've had their films or their books optioned. I have, Beth Massey has, Lucy Taylor has. There's a bunch of women. It's not on the same level somehow. It just doesn't, it's not this big change, this big direction. And I don't know why that is. I mean, there's lots of women who, if you look on Facebook, there's a group called the Women in Horror Group, and they profile a lot of women that are in film, that are actresses, and women who are directors and so on. There's a lot of them. And of course, writers. Lots of women write, lots of women. So I don't know what it is. I don't know why there's kind of a lack of movement when you get to a certain point. I don't think this is different than anything else. You can pick any corporation. Yeah, you'll find some women who are the president, or some woman, 2 or 3 women who are in managerial positions near the top or something. But that's that's a small number compared to the number of men who are driving industries and driving this business of writing. So I don't know. I think that women would like to be heard. They're writing, they're doing the work, and they should be heard. And I think I've always said this, that if a woman can read a story that's written by a man and relate to it, why in the world can't a man read a story by a woman and relate to it? You know, it's just like, come on, we're all human beings here. And if it's something that's felt, if it's something that's experienced, if it's some reaction, then anybody should be able to relate to any of that. It doesn't mean you love that particular story, but it just means that there shouldn't be these biases. You know, be open. There are some amazing women writers that have written what I suppose would be called softer horror. For example, Shirley Jackson. I mean, Shirley Jackson wrote, I guess some people would call her a fantasy writer, but certainly it's very dark fantasy. And, you know, she's written some amazing stuff. One of her wonderful stories is The Lottery, which everybody probably has read in high school because it used to be a staple. And it's about people that are in a village, and they have this ritual that they perform every year, and nobody really questions it, but it's a choice, and people are selected for the ritual, and people don't want to be selected, or they get upset if they're selected, or they get upset if someone in their family is selected, and it's a real horror. And why is this? Well, you find out at the end why, because that's sacrificed. This person sacrificed. So I mean, that's a pretty powerful story. And I think it was Neil Gaiman wrote, maybe it was Clive Barker. God, I can't remember. No, Clive Barker wrote, I think it was in Books of Blood. He wrote a story similar to that of two guys who were traveling around the British countryside, and there's this. Suddenly they find these like pylons that are created by human beings. It's a similar type of story, and yet, you know, this is like a theme. Oh, by the way, when you said earlier something about every plot has been done, yes, it all has been done. And somebody went through Shakespeare once and deduced that there were 33 plots, 34 plots in existence, and that they'd all been represented in Shakespeare's work. So, yeah, you know, there's this plot and that plot, you know, and you can see them all. It's not the plot itself. It's all been done. There's only so much in the world. But how we do it is what makes it unique, that you do it your way, I do it my way, everybody does it their way. So, you know, that's why you get stories that are so, not that the plot is unfamiliar, but that the story itself is so wondrous. It captivates and hangs on to you, you know. So yeah. Anyway, so women in horror. There are women writers. I think people should be buying their books, not because they have to buy them or because they feel sorry for women or any of that stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff out there to read, and they're depriving themselves of not having this opportunity. So we have a month where we, you know, yell and scream in our way and get attention for women, and hopefully women will, you know, progress a little bit more further every year and get, you know, more sales and have the option of having a career and getting their work out there and having people read it and enjoy it, and, you know, being part of this realm that it's a difficult world, publishing. It always has been difficult. It always will be, but now it's even more difficult, I think, and for a lot of reasons. But women are trying, and I think it's really good that women can help each other in this world, in this month particularly, where they can be profiled and each other, and, you know, show people there's a lot out there. You know, you just gotta have a look at it, because some of it is really, really good.
Yes, and that is a great perspective to have, and that's how I look forward to with my own works and everything. What advice or words of inspiration do you have for aspiring writers?
I always say the same thing whenever I'm asked in an interview or whenever I write something, you know, it's always the same. I always have gone to the I Ching or the I Ching, some people say, which is the ancient Chinese book of changes. And you probably know it. Most people have run across it, or I guess they used to anyway. It used to be done with sticks, but you can also do it with coins. And so there is a hexagram. There's six lines, and they form all kinds of combinations. And depending on the combination, you can look it up in the book. And then when you look it up, you're basically getting some information about, it's almost like a mystical connection to, you threw the coins in this way, they created these lines, and so this is for you to read and ponder over. So in the I Ching, there is a phrase that comes up frequently, which I like a lot, because I think it is the thing that, a thread in my life that has always been there. And that little phrase is, perseverance furthers. And if you persevere, something will happen. If you don't persevere, nothing will happen. But if you persevere with what you want, and that's writing, and that's selling your writing, getting your writing out there into people's hands, being creative, living that life, if you persevere, it doesn't say it'll be easy, it says it furthers. It furthers things, it moves things along.
Thank you so much. That is a very touching quote right there. Well, Nancy, can you please provide your contact information, website, social media platforms where we can follow you and tune in to your works?
Well, I probably don't remember all those URLs, but I'm on Facebook, Nancy Kilpatrick. You'll be able to find me. And I'm on Instagram, I guess under my same name. Twitter, the same. I have a blog, which I do usually once a month. I have a newsletter. If you want to go to my website, you can get on my newsletter. So it's nancykilpatrick.com is my website, and you can see a bunch of my books there. And up at the top on the right, you can sign up for my newsletter, which is just your name and your email address. And then you'll get an email saying, do you really want to do this? And then if you say yes, you'll get the newsletter. So that's it. I'm pretty well everywhere. So yeah, I'm easily found.
Thank you so much. Again, this is Everything Horror Podcast. I am your host, Stacy Cox, and we were joined by Nancy Kilpatrick. Make sure you check her out, check out all of her works, follow her to stay up to date. And Nancy, thank you again for taking this time to meet with me. It is a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Stacy. It was Stacy. I'm trying to put your names together. Stacy. Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun for me, and it was really kind of you to do this. Yeah.
And everyone, have a great night, and until next time, stay scary.